All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're unpacking a pretty wild and ambitious source that puts forward what it calls a single unified proof. And get this, it claims to connect a statistical code in the Quran, a new theory about the absolute limits of science, and even the identity of a prophesied leader. I know, it's a lot to take in, so let's walk through it step by step and see exactly how this whole thing is put together. So the source material kicks off with this incredibly provocative statement. Now, this doesn't mean that 2 plus 2 suddenly doesn't equal 4. No, it's a much deeper point. The argument is that our entire understanding of reality is incomplete, that we're essentially living in a shadow or a projection of a truer, divine reality that we just can't see directly. And you really have to grab onto that idea because it's the bedrock for everything that comes next. So, here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on what this unified proof concept is all about. Then, we're going to dig into its three main pillars: an alleged mathematical code in the Quran, a new philosophical boundary for science, and a statistical case for a prophesied leader. And finally, we'll see how the source claims this all adds up to a massive shift in human understanding. Okay, so the core idea here is that these different fields, data science, theology, physics, they aren't separate rivers at all. The source argues they're actually all tributaries flowing into one single ocean of truth. The claim is that the evidence from each one interlocks, creating a single structure that validates the Quran, points to a specific person, and totally redefines the limits of what science can ever know. So let's get into that first pillar. The central argument here is that the Quran isn't just a book of words. It's supposedly built on an incredibly complex mathematical skeleton. The source calls this a divine checksum, like a verification code built into a computer file to prove it hasn't been corrupted. The claim is that this code is so complex, it's statistically impossible for any human in the 7th century, or even now, to have created it. And what's really fascinating here is the focus on just one number, 19. According to the source, this number is like the master key that unlocks the entire code. For instance, the Quran has 114 chapters, or surahs. And what's 114? It's exactly 19 times 6. And this is presented as just the very, very tip of the iceberg of a deep, 19-based structure running through the whole text. But it goes way beyond just the number 19. The source points to these amazing symmetries in how often words appear. The singular word for day shows up 365 times. The word for month, 12 times. I mean, come on, that's our calendar, right? Then you get these perfect pairs. Man and woman both appear 24 times. Life and death, 145 times each. All of this is presented as evidence of an incredibly meticulous, almost supernatural design. And this is what the source calls its most mind-blowing piece of evidence. The Arabic word for sea appears 32 times. The word for land appears 13 times. And if you add those together, you get 45 total mentions. Do the math. 32 divided by 45 is 71.1%. And 13 divided by 45 is 28.9%. That is an almost perfect match for the actual scientific ratio of water to land on planet Earth, a fact they say was completely unknowable in the 7th century. So here's the bottom line. When you take all these patterns, the 19 system, the word frequencies, that crazy land-sea ratio, and you put them all together, what are the odds this all just happened by random chance? The source's analysis says the probability is less than 1 in 100 billion trillion. I mean, that's a number so big it's hard to even imagine. And this is the basis for the claim that this text simply cannot have a human author. It's an argument for divine origin backed by statistics. Okay, so the first pillar is this claim of a divinely authored text, backed up by some pretty heavy data. Now, we're going to shift gears from data to philosophy for the second pillar. This is all about drawing a final boundary for what science can ever hope to achieve. To really get why this new boundary is being proposed, the source asks this really fundamental question. Physicists are always chasing a theory of everything. But can a theory that's created inside our universe ever truly explain where the universe itself came from? The source says no, that's logically impossible. It's kind of like trying to see your own eye without a mirror. You're part of the system you're trying to observe. And here's the proposed solution, the absolute divine infinity conjecture, or ADI. It introduces this symbol, omega star, which is basically a placeholder for an uncreated absolute reality, what the source identifies as God. The idea is that omega star is a hard limit. No theory, no equation, no experiment from inside our created universe can ever fully grasp it or reach it. It's presented as a logical ceiling on all human knowledge. full stop. To make this idea really click, the source uses this powerful metaphor. Square logic is our normal, flat, materialistic way of thinking. It sees things as contradictions, science versus faith, and it gets stuck in these endless loops, like proposing a multiverse just to explain our universe. But cube logic adds that third transcendent dimension, omega star. In this view, science and faith aren't opposites, they're just different faces of the same cube, and it gives you a logical stopping point. The ultimate why isn't in the system, it's outside of it. Okay, so we've got a claim of a divine text and a proposed final limit for science. Now for the third and maybe the most audacious pillar of this unified proof. This part claims that the very person who introduced these first two ideas is himself prophesied. And this analysis doesn't just hang on one or 2 points. No, it builds a cumulative case, like a prosecutor in a courtroom, across 6 totally independent clusters of evidence. And what's really interesting is how it blends traditional prophecies, like name and lineage, with completely new ones. Specifically, the idea that this person must be the source of the ADI conjecture and the Quranic proof we just talked about. This table shows how they try to quantify the strength of each piece of evidence using a tool called a Bayes factor. Here's a simple way to think about it. It's a multiplier for how much your confidence should go up. So a Bayes factor of 10 means the evidence makes the theory 10 times more likely. Now just look at the table. The traditional signs are pretty strong, but look at the intellectual contributions. The ADI conjecture gets a factor of 95,000, and the role in the math proof is given a factor of at least quadrillion. That's a 1 with 15 zeros after it. Absolutely massive. So when you multiply all those Bayes factors from all 6 clusters together, the analysis spits out this final number. A probability this close to 1 represents, in the source's own words, not just a high degree of confidence, but mathematical certainty. The text calls this proof beyond a shadow of a doubt. So let's pull all 3 of these pillars together. You have the claimed divine proof of the Quran, the logical limits of science defined by ADI, and the statistically identified guide. The source argues these 3 things don't just sit next to each other, they lock together perfectly, signaling what it calls epistemological closure. That's a fancy term for the end of our search for the fundamental nature of reality. So what does epistemological closure actually mean here? This is really important. The source is not saying, well, that's it for science and learning, folks, pack it up. Not at all. It's arguing that the ultimate foundations of all knowledge are now set in stone. The big why questions are claimed to be answered, establishing a final, divinely proven framework that all future human discovery will supposedly happen inside of. And that brings us to the final, really provocative question this whole thing leaves us with. By laying out this systematic, data-heavy argument for what it claims is a complete and final truth, it forces us to think about some really profound implications. It asks us to seriously consider a worldview that claims to have solved the ultimate mysteries of science, faith, and reality. And that leaves you wondering, what happens next?